Okay, today I'm going to talk to you about the menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle is a 28-day cycle which occurs in women whereby the egg cell is released and the lining of the uterus kind of prepares itself for the implantation of that fertilized egg cell. So we're just going to start with a quick recap. Here's the female reproductive system. Egg cells are released from these structures here called the ovaries. The egg cell travels down the oviduct, and if it gets fertilized here in the oviduct, it will implant in the wall of the uterus, and this is where the fetus will grow and develop. Another word for the uterus is the womb. So what this diagram here is showing is it's showing this lining of the uterus here. So we can see here the uterus lining is quite built up, and here it breaks down. So the menstrual cycle is kind of controlled by different hormones. The first one at the beginning of the menstrual cycle, at day 1, we need to know about is called FSH. That stands for follicle stimulating hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone, and this is released from the pituitary gland. So FSH, it gets released from the pituitary gland. It's a hormone, so it travels in the blood to the ovaries. So what FSH does is it affects here the ovary. It causes the egg cell to mature. So it gets that egg cell matured and ready to be released. So that's the role of the first hormone, FSH. Now FSH, it causes the stimulation of the release of estrogen, the second hormone we need to know about. Now estrogen begins with an O. That helps us remember it's released from the ovary. So what estrogen does is it allows the wall of the uterus to build up, kind of getting ready for the implantation of a fertilized egg cell. So let's have a look what it does on here. So estrogen gets released from the ovary, but what it does is it acts here to allow the uterus lining to build up. So the wall gets thicker here, ready for that fertilized egg cell to come in and implant. Now, when estrogen levels get to a certain level, we have the release of our next hormone. This hormone is called LH. LH stands for luteinizing hormone. This is also released from the pituitary gland. Now, the way that I remember that these ones released from the pituitary gland is the ones that have letters that stand for them are both released from the pituitary gland. Ones which are words are not. So LH is released from the pituitary gland. So on day 14, we have a sudden surge of LH, luteinizing hormone, that causes ovulation. So it causes the release of the egg cell. So let's see that on here. So at day 14, LH, it actually acts here. So ovulation, causing ovulation, which is the release of the egg cell. So the egg cell will start to be released from the ovary and travel down here. So that's on day 14. Now, the final hormone that we need to know about is called progesterone. Now, progesterone isn't released from the pituitary gland or the ovary. It's released from this thing called the corpus luteum. So what the corpus luteum is once ovulation has occurred, so once the egg cell's been released from the ovary, the follicle develops into this thing called the corpus luteum. So this structure only exists once ovulation has occurred. This corpus luteum releases progesterone. And that's the next hormone that we need to know about. So, what progesterone does, so remember, progesterone, it's released from the corpus luteum. Progesterone maintains the lining of the uterus. So it keeps that uterus lining nice and thick, ready for implantation of a fertilized egg cell. So let's just see that on the reproductive system. Progesterone maintains the uterus lining. So again, keeping it nice and thick, just in case that fertilized egg cell comes down here for implantation. Okay, so towards the end of the cycle, let's say that implantation has not occurred. What happens is, well, we'll see in just a second, because we need to know the effect that progesterone has on the other hormones. Because progesterone actually inhibits the release of LH, so we won't have any further ovulation. And it also inhibits the production of FSH. So when we've got progesterone, we're not going to be producing FSH. If there's no FSH, it means we'll have a lower level of estrogen as well. So when the progesterone levels start to drop after a while, because the corpus luteum stops releasing it, as progesterone levels go down, it means the uterus lining will no longer be maintained. This causes the lining to break down, just like in the first stage of the cycle. So this first stage here, remember, this is where, as the lining is broken down, this is where bleeding occurs, called menstruation, as a part of the menstrual cycle. And then the whole cycle starts again, because if our progesterone levels go down, it means FSH is no longer inhibited and FSH is released again. So, just to summarise, the 4 hormones involved are FSH, estrogen, LH and progesterone. FSH and LH are released from the pituitary gland, estrogen from the ovary, progesterone from the corpus luteum. The job of FSH is to mature the egg cells. The job of estrogen is to build up the lining in the uterus. The job of LH is to allow ovulation to occur, the release of the egg cell. And the job of progesterone is to maintain the levels of lining in the uterus. Finally, estrogen is stimulated by FSH. LH is stimulated by estrogen. Progesterone is released from the corpus luteum, which only exists once ovulation has occurred. And progesterone inhibits LH and it inhibits FSH as well. Thank you.